No, no, no. Can't be on the spot like this, man. Okay, yeah, no, I'm just kidding. Let's go, bro. I'm ready. We're spitting in these fires. Call me Bowser. Guru Nation, we're here. I hope you like the new setup. Um, I hope you like what I've done to the place. So, what we have is a pretty interesting topic today, inspired by Daniel Perez from Gleam. Shout out to Daniel Perez. He was actually not that long ago on this podcast here in Yuma. So he works for Gleam, and we're kind of working on this idea for Save Our Sites. So check out saveoursites.com, by the way, shameless plug. But we are really, and this is where the new tech vendors, the new tech companies are really making their name for themselves, and they're making actual changes in the industry at the ground level. You no longer need permission from anyone to implement a lot of tools, and Gleam is a perfect example. But ultimately, who are we trying to reach? Because as much as I love LinkedIn, and I mean, LinkedIn's been great for my career, the frontline workers are not really there. The frontline workers are working. Like, they're not on LinkedIn in the middle of the day. They're out there randomizing patients, screening patients. We're talking about the clinical research coordinators. And this topic is about the career trajectory of CRCs and why CRCs stay or leave their place of employment. I thought it was a very good idea from Daniel for many reasons. But number one is, this is not just for the coordinators themselves. This is for the site directors. This is for the job recruiters. This is for the CROs and the sponsors and the tech vendors who ultimately hire these CRCs. So that's basically the market for a CRC. I'm going to begin with the end in mind. The marketplace for an experienced CRC is stay at the site, work your way up to be site director, or if the site joins a site network, work your way up in the executive suites of the site network, or leave and go do something else in the industry. Most of the time it's in the industry. People don't leave this industry for the most part. So CRCs usually do what I just mentioned, or they'll go on to be CRAs, project managers, medical writers. If they are international medical graduates, they will go on to be potentially medical monitors. Shout out to Daniela. I know you're listening to every episode. She's our new hire. So why do CRAs stay or leave? And there's a lot of, I think, insights we can get as an industry, myself included. I mean, in many respects, this is a self-referentiating tool for me as I'm listening to myself say these things. I'm also talking out loud to myself about how to maintain retention, employee retention, and employee satisfaction at my own site. Because when you have a good coordinator, and by good, I mean one that can do the job, you don't want to lose them. And it's the employer's responsibility at that point to keep them. So getting the experience, Nassim Taleb has a very good book called Skin in the Game. I'm actually going to write an article on this, but he essentially says the difference between theoretical kind of knowledge and real-world pragmatic knowledge is skin in the game. And skin in the game comes from experience. And good judgment comes from experience. And that experience is usually a factor of going through some bad experiences via bad judgment. And that's a Mark Twain quote. He says, good judgment comes from experience, which usually comes from bad judgment. So you learn how to not make certain mistakes. If I were to interview any of my coordinators of all time here on this pod, they would all tell you, yeah, you can teach somebody something a million times, but it's not until we experience it for ourselves that we actually understand. And that's part of being human. We are, if nothing else, we experience. That's what we're designed to do, is experience, and no one else can have your same experience. That's just yours. And so this is why we need experienced coordinators in the industry. But the experienced coordinators, they start at the sites, but then they move on for the most part. And the obvious answers would be, well, money. Sites don't pay that well. And so ultimately, they go move on to where there's better pay, which is a big percentage of them do. They go on to the CROs, to the sponsors, where they get significant pay raises, and or these days the tech vendors as well, like Gleam, like Inato, like Patient Ace. One of our first employee at Patient Ace is a former coordinator, like Creo. Shout out to Creo and Inato for sponsoring this podcast. The leave factors, besides the pay, because the pay sometimes the sites can't really control. Like I've lost, even in my 4 years here in Yuma, I've lost a couple of coordinators due to pay. Like a university or a CRO would offer them like double what we're paying. Like there's no way we can match that. So good luck, and thank you for your service with us, and we need to find somebody else. So there's certain things that sites can control. And this is where I think a lot of sites kind of drop the ball. But if you're watching, if you're listening, I hope you don't drop the ball. So a lot of it stems from financial insecurity and tension. So there's like securing enough of a workload at the site. Because if you're in this industry long enough at the site level, you'll hear this time and time again. It's feast or famine. What does that mean? It means it's never ideal work environment. During feast mode, sites are so busy, this is where typically coordinators get overburdened, overworked, stressed out. They feel like they're not paid fairly because they're not. And then you have the periods of famine where you have like months of very little activity, maybe just paperwork, and you're in maintenance mode or you're in study startup mode. And some coordinators can get bored during the famine months. So you never have an ideal, consistent workflow. And I think I've had employees tell me like, hey, I actually want to work more, but it's been really slow the last few months. And so they kind of want to, like, especially the ambitious ones, kind of want to test the markets. And then, or vice versa, like during the very hectic periods. Hey, you know what? We're working way too long. It's stressful. I'm going to go look for something with more of a work-life balance. Now, this is the challenge for management. And CRCs start to create narratives in their heads, too. Like, oh, Dan probably just chasing the money, or I think I've reached my limit at this site. I don't think there's any more opportunities here, which is not correct. At the right site, there's always opportunities. Like at our site, we're in growth mode. We're about to start expanding outside of our geographic areas. So we're about to start expanding into other geographic territories. And for the original coordinators that are still there, that is something that they can be a part of. And they can have that, I guess, if they're chasing that constant scramble for financial security, if you catch the right site at the right time, you'll be there. You'll find the site that can kind of keep the workflow consistent. And one of the things with my site, a growing site, is we're always slightly overhired. So we don't really have the burnout aspect, but we might have the financial security aspects. Like we still don't offer benefits, which we're working on doing, but the economics of it is just doesn't make sense right now. And we're working on having financial compensation packages to where they're tied to certain outcomes, and it takes a while to do that. Like it's a trial and error, much like a clinical trial. So you got to figure out the efficacy of doing certain, like pulling certain levers, and then the safety, like what's the drawbacks of this backfiring. Then there's also the disconnect between the site level innovation and what sponsors are willing to pay for. So this is kind of like the hammered nail culture, where as a coordinator ascends the ranks, their affinity to share their story lessens and diminishes, because the more they share to the public, the more they stick out like a nail, and then they're going to get hammered in. And that's kind of the culture of pharma, is you don't want to stick out. You want to stay in your lane. Now, at the site level, I think you have the more freedom to do that. Well, you'll find that once you start getting into CROs and sponsors, you're going to get hammered back in. And I think that kind of suffocates, like, ultimately true innovation. It initially suffocates freedom of expression, but in the long run, I think it does suffocate innovation to some extent. And then there's the technology as a detriment. So sites are kind of sick and tired of seeing technology that doesn't work. We just saw, and I'm not bashing Clario as an example, but Clario just got bought by PPD. So now we know all PPD studies are going to force this particular tech, and I don't even know the tech stacks that they have, but you're going to have to use certain tech that you don't want to or you're not familiar with. And it kind of happened to us on a study where we had to use an EDC and a direct-to-source system that we don't use, and the sponsor insisted we use it. And not surprisingly, like, we don't necessarily have the systems for that, because all of our systems are built around our own tools. But now the sponsor wants to force their tools on us, and it's our fault that we accepted it, but you see problems because of it, especially on the regulatory side. So this can drive a coordinator nuts, burn them out, even more so than the actual culture at the site is the tech stuff. And then what are the stay factors? And this is where my wife is the HR. She just left here, but she's the HR for our site. And then I try to be HR as well in regards to planning the coordinator's career trajectory, at least in the beginning. Like, I feel like I'm in a unique situation to where I'm bringing in people that are just off of their talent, but no experience in research. And if we go back to that Mark Twain quote, the way you get experience, besides being taught to you, is by having bad judgment at some point and then learning, teaching yourself, hey, that didn't work out too well. That becomes experience. Now you know how to do the good actions instead to avoid that. And now you're an experienced coordinator. And that means all of our staff are going to go through that. As good as I think I am at training them, as much as we put them through our CRC Academy, there's no experience for personal experience. That's it. That's how humans have evolved to be what we are. We are experiencing organisms, experiencing beings. So culture does become important, especially for us, because we are going to have failures. And so it's important to have empathy, but also balance it with ambition and, I guess, teaching responsibility early on. This is why you want, and when I hire, we hire for good personal skills, empathy, good attitude, responsible, passion, ambitious, and wanting to do things beyond the job description. That I hate whenever I hear that's not in my job description. That's, to me, it's like a red flag. Luckily, we haven't had too many people say that. But there's something else, like an intangible, called grit. And there's actually a book written by a woman. I cannot remember her name. I'm sorry, but the Angela Duckworth. There we go. It just came to my head. Angela Duckworth wrote this book called Grit. And it's basically stubborn refusal to give up, even when things get hard. Why do you need that when you're a CRC? Because I just said from that Mark Twain quote, you become experienced by having bad judgment first. And you get lucky and have some good judgment here and there and then start learning things. As much as we want to train and take credit for training people, we're really just creating an environment where they're going to train themselves effectively. And so that's the way I look at my site, is it's very much culture dependent. This is why we will never necessarily focus on all the KPIs that bigger sites may focus on, like especially when you're in a site network where it's just profit margins. We're really in a different stage. We're looking at growth and then expansion. At some point, you're going to need a very thick layer of quality assurance, which we've started to implement this year. But hiring for these personal traits, I think, is the important for the site to have this culture of and purpose, and then nurturing the relationship. So retention of the coordinator is created by a management that ensures a feeling that they're wanted and that they're cared for. And one of the things I look at is looking at the career trajectories of these people. You're in me and my role, I end up becoming a mentor to the staff, and I have relationships with all of our staff that have moved on from Yuma Clinical Trials. I talk to all of them to this day and follow their careers, and I'm still here. Some of them text me, hey, I need advice for my career, and I try to help them. I look at it as a responsibility for myself, even though they don't work for us. And I think this is what the industry kind of needs to do more of as a whole, because ultimately, if you look at this industry, we're relatively new. Like, we're less than 100 years old. And as a clinical research industry, we're like 60 years old. And clinical research as we know it is like 40 years. And I think we're only going to have another 40, 50 years before AI, robots, digital twins, things like that kind of take over. And so we're in a unique couple of decades here where we can set up people for success in this industry and be mindful of how we cater to every single personality type that comes through our companies and nurture them if we can. But it's very important to be selective about who, because not everyone fits this criteria. So this kind of boils down to our vision with Save Our Sites. And it really is a matter of authenticity is what should drive a culture of quality, not a perfect site metrics, not perfect profit margins, but the CRC that wants to be part of the future of a thriving site ecosystem, which I think SOS is trying to do. So then technology, I just said 40 years from now, this industry is going to look very different. But why not play a part in how it turns out? And why not create a environment of authenticity where the culture makes that outcome possible faster and better? And so the new standard is really going to be this technology, and this is for all you technology vendors. Technology must provide clear transparency of how it's effectively helping the coordinators through their work. And it's a win-win. If the sites love the product, the sponsors will pay for it because sponsors want efficiencies at the end of the day. This industry is full of inefficiencies. There's probably a good synonym for clinical research is inefficiency. It's the necessary evil to get a drug to market. Well, it's an entire industry here of people aligned ideally for the same goal, and it's aligning the CRC's daily tools with their long-term career safety. So CRCs stay at a site when they're given a vision, voice, and a nurturing environment that includes money, but that doesn't always mean just money. Matter of fact, they leave when they feel like they are easily replaced commodity. Meaning, if you're a site and your only competition, the only factor that's keeping your staff there is money, there's always going to be somebody offering more. So you have to really touch their humanity. And this is especially true going forward. It's going to be especially important going forward for employee retention and for CRC nurturing. In a world dominated by these algorithms, authentic human storytelling is the most powerful retention tool. Ultimately, we are all creatures that experience. And the way we experience and learn and teach ourselves and teach others is through narrative and through the power of story. Entire civilization is built around storytelling and narrative. So in our industry, it's not much difference. Now, it's challenging because we're essentially pulling back the cover on the inner workings of what happens at a site. And when you do that, you're going to see all the inefficiencies, the PIs that don't have enough time to provide oversight, who generally picks up that slack. And most of the time, sponsors don't even realize it's the coordinators. And so these are the people we have to keep engaged in our industry. We don't want them to get dejected and move on to a CRO, and they're going to start treating sites bad because they had a bad experience there. And they're going to think that all sites are that way. Or when they go to a sponsor, it's essentially going to be reflective, like projecting back on the sites, even the good sites, that, hey, I worked at a site, I know how they are. It's chaos, it's horrible culture. And so I think it's not only good for your own site to really think about what makes CRCs stay and CRCs leave, but I think we should, as a industry, especially as sites, and at the Save Our Sites, we're trying to do this, create a storytelling culture where coordinators are free to speak with the real issues that they have, not derivatives of idealistic issues, but like the real issues that they're dealing with. And that's the hard part, but technology is definitely here to help or hurt. The culture of the site is definitely, that is in the direct hands of the site management. So myself, I'm one of them. There's thousands like me in this country, in the world. And then selecting the right people, research naive, to join the industry, because it's not for everyone. And again, like I said, grit, ambition, empathy, passion. And then minimizing the burnout, but also minimizing the lack of challenges. So I've done videos on this where once you've mastered your job as a CRC, you kind of get bored and want to move on to somewhere else. But it's the site's responsibility to create challenges for the ambitious ones are going to constantly want challenges. They don't want to be bored. The mediocre ones, they're okay just like sailing by. You're going to have both at your site, but you want to definitely keep the ambitious ones. And that means creating challenges for them, which is a win-win because it's going to help you grow your site as well. And so this is how we get progress. This is how we get innovation. This is how we lessen stress. This is how we reduce that work-life balance nonsense. And this is how we keep CRCs at their sites happier for longer, or allow them and facilitate them to move on and continue to be an asset to the site from another stakeholder perspective position. That's it. Didn't want to take too long, but I thought it was important to do this. So let me know what you think in the comments, and like, subscribe, comment, share. Catch you later. Bye-bye. Hey, if you guys like that kind of content, make sure you like, subscribe, comment, share. Stay tuned for more videos.